Welcome to the Inferno Cast. Today's guest is a fourth-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's also an MMA fighter that fought in Pancrase, K1, and the UFC. He currently runs King's Academy of Martial Arts in Sydney, Australia. Please welcome Elvis Sinosic. How are you doing today, buddy?
Good, thanks. It's good to be the king. Always got to throw that call sign in at the start. Things are going well. I mean, obviously everyone's been under the same circumstances, and we're making the most of it. But thankfully for us, we're back on the mats, back training. So it's a start. It's not quite where we want to be, but we're not far off.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely helps the stir-crazy thing of just being pinned up in the house or not being able to train. So I'm sure that all the guys and the students are appreciating that.
Yeah, no, look, definitely. Look, I even had some students who are like obviously competitors and fighters and stuff, and they were going out and they were training. They were trying to stay busy, but even they said coming back is just different. There's a different intensity. It's once you suddenly have your training partners around you, you're back in the gym, the level just changes. And whether you want it to or not, that's just what happens. Because when you're in that kind of environment, you don't want to look like a sissy. You want to push yourselves a little harder. And then, you guys, they feed off each other, and then that's just the natural part of it. And that's why gyms are such and academies are so important to people and their health and well-being, because you can't do it yourself, but it's never the same regardless what anyone says.
For sure. I mean, it's like the pressure of your peers moves you forward. Sometimes that camaraderie helps people kind of, push a little harder, get refocused. It's kind of like the unspoken rules of the tribe, where it's like you got to test your limits and you got to push what you think you can do. And it definitely comes out whenever people are in that group environment, especially an empowering environment such as a martial arts school or a gym like that. And I think that trickles down from leadership. So you've kind of instilled that with your group. If they're raising each other's standards instead of trying to tear each other down, I mean, that speaks a lot to what you've established there. And I definitely want to get to that. But before we get to the modern school, I want to go back to where it started. When you were a kid, how did you find martial arts? What was the inspiration? Was it a family member? Was it TV, comic books? How did you find martial arts? What did that look like for you?
Well, this is obviously going to give away my age. I started back in the day, the Bruce Lee era, Enter the Dragon, and all those movies. So I used to watch the Bruce Lee movies on VHS tape. I got that interest for martial arts from that, and I wanted to train martial arts. The only martial arts at the time was at my primary school, which had a judo program. So my parents put me in that, and I was happy as Larry. It's kind of funny when I kind of look back now. I love the grappling aspect of it. Didn't really like the throwing part of it, mainly because I was a tall, lanky dude. So I always struggled with a lot of the throws. I could foot sweep or drag people to the ground, but once I got to the ground, I was a bit of a natural, so I quite enjoyed that. Did the judo for quite a few years until I got to move to high school, and then high school, I got my driver's license, so now I could start going to wherever I wanted. I didn't have to actually just train at school, so I was looking for a striking school, and again, this is just my ignorance. I found Taekwondo, which was being sold as the Korean Kung Fu. And I'm like, oh, well, I want to do Kung Fu like Bruce Lee, and this one's Korean Kung Fu, so I'll do Taekwondo. So I did Taekwondo for quite a few years, got my black belt in that, ended up going to uni. Kind of the martial arts kind of fell behind, but I got into other team sports. I used to play. I wanted to stay fit and active, so every month, me and my friends would pick a new sport and we'd just play it. So we'd go do tennis. We'd do tennis for a month. We'd play soccer for a month. Rugby for a month. Volleyball for a month. And then from the volleyball, I actually kind of really enjoyed that. Ended up playing like state league volleyball, going into beach volleyball, which kind of got me quite excited. I graduated. And then when I started work, I started working with an old friend that I went to primary school with, and he used to do karate. And he goes, hey, I've got this VHS of this show called UFC 2. And he goes, I'm not going to tell you what it is. Go home and watch it. I went home, little skinny Brazilian dude, chokes everyone out. And I'm like, this shit's good. I want to get into this. So I started reading Blitz martial art magazine, and we were lucky. John Will, one of the Dirty Dozen, one of the first 12 non-Brazilian black belts, was traveling the world. He actually owned the Blitz magazine and used it as a platform to go out and discover different martial arts. So he trained Salat in Indonesia, went to India, the wrestling pits there, and obviously ended up in Brazil, where he met the Gracies. Through the Gracies, he met the Machados and Hagen in particular, who was his mentor. He brought that back to Australia. And part of what made him go to Brazil is a Brazilian had actually come to Australia, and in one of the martial arts magazines put up a $50,000 challenge. You know, basically the Gracie challenge. He wasn't a Gracie, but one of their students. And so John's like, well, before I jump on, I want to learn. Like, he's a smart dude. Like, so he went out and learnt about it before he jumped in, and he realized, you know, lamb to the slaughter. But he discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was very passionate. And what's really funny is he brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back to Australia, and I discovered it through Anthony Lange, who was my coach, and he trained under John Will. But back in the day, John Will was like, you shouldn't do just one martial art. So he was like, he was teaching Muay Thai, he was teaching Salat, incorporating it with wrestling, and then the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he called it shoot fighting. And so he had this pretty much MMA mentality. And it's funny, as the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu started to flow into the country, some of the people that he'd introduced kind of went back to Brazil, came back and said, oh, you don't need all this other rubbish. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is all you need. And John kind of stuck with the shoot fighting for a while, but even he kind of slowly headed back more into the pure Jiu-Jitsu. And nowadays he's basically predominantly a Jiu-Jitsu guy. But it was just really interesting that back in the 90s, he already understood the concept of MMA, and that you had to integrate the different forms of combat to be effective in combat. So, and that obviously played a big part in developing how I evolved in the sport. Even from very early, I was very enamored with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because, as I said, I really enjoyed the grappling of judo. I did my taekwondo, discovered a school that was Jun Fan, which was a little bit of, you know, obviously the Bruce Lee style, the striking, the grappling, the stick work, all that sort of stuff. I ended up moving to Sydney to play pro beach volleyball, was playing pro beach. But while I was up here, I found a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, which was Anthony Lange, and he's similar. He did predominantly Jiu-Jitsu, but also had some of the shoot fighting that John Will taught. So I took that on board, and then it just kind of grew and built from there.
Well, you know, back in the day when Jiu-Jitsu was getting started, I was actually talking to Carlos Machado about this just like 2 days ago, is, you know, a lot of the people that made up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at that time were other martial arts black belts or running schools. Like, you know, it was inherently started by people that were blending arts and styles. And, you know, it's not that surprising to hear that, you know, like with John Wills, like with his experience in other styles and traveling the world, of knowing, man, I mean, you need to know multiple things, but there also is value in majoring in that new concept, because there was a lot of details and subtleties to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style that, especially when you look back at shoot fighting in those early days, like, because I kind of came up in some similar circles with the JKD Shuto influence, and it just, you missed out on some fundamentals in the beginning because it was very attack based, you know, like punch, kick, attack, submit, especially with the leg locks. And over the years, those fundamentals kind of came back to haunt me, you know, where you see people sometimes years later when you're playing with people that are also world class, like those little fundamentals kind of make the difference at times. But that blended style, though, I mean, that really did represent what jiu-jitsu was about. But there for a moment, it was like, well, what we blend it with kind of mattered, you know, as it was spreading across, because like you said, with the taekwondo, it didn't translate into the combat sports or reality-based fighting as easily. And it just took us a while to figure out like which ones would translate and pair with it. I was actually talking to one of my students today about that, you know, back in the day, mixing martial arts was not really welcomed and cool by everybody. You know, it was kind of like, whoa, hey, you know, you can't do both. That's not allowed. But that's awesome. You came up in an environment where that was embraced.
Yeah, no, it was, yeah, most traditionalists were like, yeah, if you did that, you know, you can't do that. You're diluting the sport. I was kind of lucky because John Will was a Westerner teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rather than learning it from a Brazilian. He had a very Western approach, which was a very structured methodological approach to it. And that kind of sat well with me because I like structure. I come from an IT background. So one of my selling points when I was fighting was the world's toughest nerd. But I like structure. I like the idea of building on stuff. And so even though John was blending, he was still very strong with having he created a syllabus. So he had fundamental techniques that you had to learn. Then you had to build your techniques off those fundamentals. And he had a structure to get to that. And I took a lot of his ideas and his structure. So with King's Academy now, we have a very similar program. We have a white belt program where we build a basic fundamental movement structure. From the movement structure, we start adding in escapes and attacks and reversals. And the goal is from white to blue is to develop techniques from all your fundamental positions: side control, back control, mount, knee ride, turtle. So all your basic positions. So when you get to blue belt, you should at least have one attack and one defense from all your fundamental positions. And I think that makes a good blue belt. Then from blue belt onwards, you start adding in different guards. So you start looking at the next level of guards, such as butterfly guards, open guards, De La Riva guards. And then you start adding sweeps, submissions, and passes for those guards. And then you'll start getting to purple belt, and then you'll start adding in your more advanced guards, your lapel guards, your single X guards, your X guards, your more advanced leg locks. So I create a kind of structure that builds on top of everything that you do previously. Now, saying that, it doesn't mean I don't teach those advanced stuff to the lower levels, but you need to be able to progress. You need to understand it better at the higher levels. So
you basically, you kind of provide an environment for they're responsible for their fundamentals at that level, but they have access to the higher levels so that they can explore and see. Yeah. And that's a piece that the modernization of jiu-jitsu, you're starting to see more and more, is different curriculum structures to try to answer the need for beginners to have solid fundamentals, but to be able to feed the higher ranks and to allow a low rank to comprehend what the higher ranks are doing. Because you go roll with a brown belt as a white belt, you're in X guard and De La Riva and spider guard, and whenever you're going to your fundamentals class and you're never talking about those things, it can be very frustrating and you don't even understand what's happening. But at the same time, that white belt needs to be spending time on those fundamentals and understanding those building blocks, because especially like over here in the US, you really see a difference in the market of, I want to win a tournament next month. You know, like I want to go compete against somebody that's been training 2 months like me. And the focus is, how good am I compared to last week versus how good am I going to be as a black belt? And sometimes you see these different journeys and paths, and everybody has a different philosophy and ways to get people there. But, you know, you being an analytical type person, how long was it before you understood that there needed to be more structure, and especially in MMA, because MMA was completely unstructured, and, you know, people started creating curriculums and almost, you know, belt structures within it because it was so unstructured. How long was it before you started trying to apply the structure to the mixed martial arts?
Well, as I said, because I came from an IT background, structure was always quite important to me. Because when you work with programming and things like that, it's all about structure. If you don't have structure, you're not going to have a working end product. So it was the same with my jiu-jitsu. I wanted to have a structure as I built up to it. Same with my MMA. I knew there was, and again, the part of that came from John Will, which I was lucky. I knew that there was individual elements. So I pretty much from the start was training on the individual elements separately. So I did my jiu-jitsu class, I went to my wrestling club, I went to my Muay Thai club. I built the individual skills, but back in the day that we didn't have MMA coaches or anything like that. So what I used to do is I would go back to the gym and I would do my own training where I would practice integrating the different skill sets together. And trying to explore different techniques. Now, I was lucky, like I did find a jiu-jitsu coach in Anthony Lange, but I was in an era where everybody was white belts. I think he was a white belt when I started, may have been blue belt, but he was always like, he got his blue, then he got his purple, I got my blue, he got his brown, I got my purple, he got his, then I got my brown, and we got our blacks pretty close to the same time. So even though he was there teaching and helping and guiding, there was a lot of self-discovery, self-exploration. Again, you know, buying VHS tests, Igor Yakimov's leg lock tapes, and
Yeah.
Mario Sperry tapes.
I used to make copies of those. Like we'd have copies of copies, you know, and they'd have like the fuzziness across the screen, and we'd be watching, rewinding, trying to do it in the living room. Because like you said, that discovery piece, because there was no discussion back in the 90s of, yeah, when you're boxing and you change ranges into the shot, and then when you immediately get into the jiu-jitsu range, this is what you're looking for. Like those chains, that discussion, if it did exist, was very, very rare. And there was just so much go learn a piece. And you would go talk to a Muay Thai fighter and your coach, and they would show you Muay Thai, and you would ask MMA questions, and they would give you their perspective of answering your question, but they weren't jiu-jitsu guys. They weren't wrestlers.
No.
Or the wrestler would come to the school and be like, hey, I just want to work takedowns on your fighters, but they didn't do strikes, you know, or submissions. And like you said, it was very compartmentalized at that time. So when you started getting momentum, when you found MMA, you watched the VHS tape and you're like, man, jiu-jitsu is cool. There's a chance for me to fight. Were you just completely having to make this up, like go to all these different coaches and hodgepodge it together to find a strategy that worked? Or did you have a couple friends or influences that were helping you strategize?
Look, predominantly, I did do it myself. As I mentioned, I did have my coach, Anthony Lange. He had done a little bit of Shudo in Japan. So he kind of had an idea. And as I mentioned, John Will had already kind of built that idea in the back of my head of, you know, how to put it together. But I was quite, again, it's the same as the people today. You know, they go out on YouTube, they look up videos, the really committed guys will go out there and try stuff. They'll watch tapes, they'll come into class, they'll drill it, and they'll jump on the mat and put it on. And I used to do the same things. I would obviously do what my coach was teaching, but then outside of that time, I would go and drill extra stuff. I'd practice. I used to get called leg humper back in the day, because obviously in jiu-jitsu, leg locking wasn't looked upon as it is today, but I really thought it was such a valuable part of your whole grappling game. So I did do a fair deep dive into leg locks myself, and interestingly enough, I competed in the inaugural 98 ADCC World Combat Championships, and I was the first athlete to ever land a heel hook submission in ADCC history. So there's a little bit of interest. Yeah. So
that's awesome. I was watching that on the that's back when they had the ADCC combat website. Like that was like the only connection. Yeah, that was like the only connection to jiu-jitsu in the world at that time. And I remember going back, and we'd get on there and we'd read the results and stuff like that. That's cool that you got to be the first one.
But yeah, so there was a lot of, you know, self-discovery in that that process. And, you know, I did do a lot of that with my, my coach, Anthony Lange, as well. And it was really good. He has a much more philosophical kind of view of jiu-jitsu. I had a much more structured view, sorry, not of jiu-jitsu, of the world. So the way he was a little bit more philosophical, I was a little bit more structured, and then coming together, it just made a really good blend. It also reminds me of when I met John Danaher. So he came out to Australia and taught it. One of the first seminars he taught was here at my academy. We had a discussion, and it was interesting. He came, same thing, similar to my coach, Anthony Lane. He came from a more philosophical background and saw the value of structure. I came from a more structural background and saw the value of philosophy. And one of the things we discovered is the way we'd come from the two different directions, but we kind of come to a similar understanding and way that we kind of approach technique and instruction. And it was really good for me back when I met him, because it made me realize a lot of what I'd been doing was in the right direction, because we had so much in common. It kind of kicks me now a little bit that, because back in the day, as I said, I used to do a lot of leg locks, but because the sport basically frowned upon it. Initially, I did it for MMA, but MMA, you know, I started in the 90s. It kind of disappeared for a while until the 2000s. So I kind of stopped doing my leg locks. And I kind of think back, if I'd kind of kept up that progress, I could be Mr. Danaher today. So,
Yeah.
you know, you win
Yeah.
some, you lose some, but at least I can say I was one of the first.
Well, for sure. You know, and I can remember back, because, you know, leg locks was one of the very first things I can remember learning. It was like triangle choke, armbar, Kimura, heel hook, Achilles lock, and a knee bar. Like those were the 6 things that was like, you do this. And I can remember when I started training in higher quality Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools, you get a couple of the eyebrow raises, you know, when you're picking up legs. And I was ignorant. Like I didn't know, like I didn't even know there was rules for different belt ranks. I was coming at it from an MMA perspective of I wanted to be a fighter, and anything that makes you tap is good. And I had kind of a similar thing there for a while, where it's like, put the leg locks on the back burner, because that was not the topic of discussion of the programs I was in. But I'm very thankful that that was some of my initial influences, because I've always looked at it as just submission grappling of, I need to find a way to win, whether we're on the ground or, you know, standing up or things like that, you know, just from a mixed martial arts perspective. So when you look at mixed martial arts, your first MMA fight, why don't you tell us that story? You know, was it, oh, the fight's tomorrow night, I'll show up and do it? Was it 6 months out, I planned for it? How did your first MMA fight come to be?
Well, as I mentioned, I discovered the UFC via the tape system, and kind of got into that tape trading era, which you were discussing before, where you'd copy tapes and then you'd send it to someone and get it back. And one day I was reading the Blitz magazine, and there was this ad, you know, UFC coming to Australia. And I'm like, oh, holy shit, this is pretty cool. Now, my kind of reasoning behind it was more about self-discovery. So I wanted to actually get in there and compete. Not because I really wasn't thinking past the event. Like I didn't want to become a UFC world champion or anything like that. It was more about, for years I'd done martial arts. And, you know, obviously part of the reason, I was a young kid, I'd been bullied and things like that. So, you know, that was also part of the reason I kind of, to build my self-confidence, to build my self-defense skills. And I wanted to be able to know that what I'd been learning was of value. I wanted to know that if I was confronted in a self-defense situation, that A, I would have the courage to stand up, that I wouldn't fall over and cry like a little girl, or B, if I did engage, that what I was doing actually worked. That was it. I just wanted to go in there, test my fortitude and my skills. And so, you know, this event came up and I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. I emailed the guy, called him. I said, look, I want to jump on board. And he's like, look, thank you. I'll keep your details. Sadly, you don't have any sort of reputation. You're an unknown. You don't have, I didn't have millions of black belts or anything like that. So he's like, look, thank you. I've got a lot of high level guys who are interested. Stay in touch and we'll see what happens. And so I literally called him every day to see how it was going. And what slowly happened is a lot of the big names who were going to fight started doing a little bit of research. They started going to, because there was a couple of gyms around, not much, that did a little bit of jiu-jitsu and a little bit of pancras. And so these guys were going to these gyms, or, you know, looking up UFC tapes from the US and going, oh, holy shit, wait, maybe I'm not ready for this. And so they started dropping out. And about, I think for me, it was about 11 days out, I got a call and they're like, oh, no, sorry, I called him. As I said, I called him every single day. And he goes, oh, I've been waiting for your call. We've got a fight. Are you interested in stepping into the tournament? I'm like, why do you think I've been calling you every day? So, you know, I got that opportunity to step in. Interestingly, again, it was back in the Prohibition era, where Australia was very like, whoa, 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 what's this cage fighting stuff? And so the Combat Sports Authority was trying to shut it down. They had control over all boxing, wrestling, and kickboxing sort of events. So what the promoter said is, look, it's a martial arts event. So all the fighters, all they were allowed to say is, I train in karate, judo, jiu-jitsu. We couldn't mention the words boxing, wrestling, or kickboxing, because as soon as we say we're a boxer or a wrestler, then in theory, the CSA have jurisdiction and they could step in and, you know, stop it. And the actual event had police officers out the front waiting to shut it down, but it ended up going ahead. It's pretty cool.
You know, John Hackleman told me a very similar story that they had where, you know, they were having this fight, and then like a day before or 2 days before, people started stirring it up and causing problems, and you know, and it was difficult. But then there was a lot of shows in those days that happened that way. Like you'd have, you know, 2 days before the venue changes, you know, or modified rules just so you could, you know, get it to happen. So your first MMA fight was for the UFC.
Yes and no. So the event was called the Australasian UFC. But as I discovered later, the promoter had used the name. It was actually an American guy named Randy. He'd used the name and obviously did the event as Australasian UFC. But then the UFC threatened legal action. So when he actually released the VHS, it got called Cage Combat 1.
Okay, that is a cool story.
Yeah. So, you know, I fought in a cage. And as I said, I went in there with the self-test, and I came through happy with that. But what changed the course was the atmosphere. So when I went in, the crowd was just cheering, and it was crazy. It's like, because it was so new, we had 5,000 people in this arena in the middle of the city, and I'm like, I'm getting the goosebumps now just thinking about it. So I'm walking down to the cage, I walk in, I'm looking around, I'm just absolutely gobsmacked. And then what happens is my opponent walks in, I see him, and I'm like, yep, okay, I'm good. And I'm just enjoying it. And then the gate clangs shut. And then just the whole world goes. And the only thing that exists is this guy opposite me. And it was just a crazy, I still remember the clang of the gate, and then just how everything disappeared. And then the fight happened, and, you know, it went all to plan, and it was fantastic. And then suddenly, as soon as the ref stops it, just the world goes, opens up again, and I can hear the chanting, Elvis, you know, and Aussie, 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 and all this stuff. And it was crazy. And it was that rush that kind of kept me coming back, because I kind of pretty much answered the questions I needed answered. And the journey from then on was just because the thrill of competition, the joy of testing myself and pushing myself to new limits.
You know, and you hear a lot of fighters, especially the old school guys, that talk about that entering MMA was never like a career. You know, I'm going to be famous, I'm going to, you know, make money, have a brand. It just really wasn't, you know, designed that way. Like talking to Enson Inoue, you know, he was talking about that, where he's like, man, I fought because I was scared of it. You know, he's like, I was scared of it, so I had to fight. Oh, I was a tougher guy, I had to take the fight. You know, there was no career management of like, oh, this will be a good matchup, this can get me there. And a lot of people that started fighting, because I know myself as well, like I started doing MMA because I just wanted to know if my stuff worked. Like you said, can you handle the pressure? And then when you feel like the crowd and the energy and just that really, really high attuned feeling to just, you know, connecting to your body and your mind and just kind of being in that moment with that much danger per se, it is addictive, you know, and it's addictive not because you enjoy beating somebody up or hitting somebody. I mean, it was never that. It was always appreciative that this guy showed up and trained hard, because it was like, thank you for being the best you could be to test my skills, because it was about self-discovery. You know, it was like, how far can I push my limits? What is my breaking point? Can I calculate and move and make decisions under duress and pressure? And especially when you're an analytical mind, I'm sure there's a piece of that is you plan and organize so much that the question comes up, how do you handle chaos? You know, like a little bit of that, you know, what's going to happen if things get crazy? And I'm sure that had to have been a part of it. Do you feel like that was intriguing to you or was a part of the journey?
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, um, for me, it was all about facing the greatest challenge. I mean, um, like my couple of fights in a row was literally Frank Shamrock, Jeremy Horn, Tito Ortiz, Evan Tanner, and Renato Sobral. You know, these guys were all champions and
Best of the best.
a
Oh
couple
man,
of
I remember
UFC
whenever
world
didn't
champions.
you beat Jeremy with a triangle choke, right?
Triangle armbar. I think today they call it the Dead Orchard, but Danaher calls it the Dead Elvis because he said I did it first. So
Oh man, that's cool. Yeah, I remember you submitting Jeremy Horn, which at that time was like, dude, Jeremy's ground game was what he was known for, you know, and he was active fighter. Like that was a big one that was awesome. And I remember that Tito fight because of the cut, man. I just broke my heart because I'm like, man, one little cut it just made everything difficult. And that's you
yeah,
honestly
I
taught
know.
me about scar tissue. You know, I mean, like I learned medically about like scar tissue is real, like being tough after fights on cuts and how you get stitched up. You know, you really instigated that to get educated, because when those cuts get bad tissue or don't get healed correctly, they just keep reopening, you know, and that is just such a struggle, you know, because you're like, ugh, you just want to fight, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, as I was saying, that um, so as I mentioned, I fought Frank Shamrock. I got the opportunity again, short notice. Most of my fights were short notice. I think in the first couple of years, I think the longest I ever had for a fight was about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I fought Frank Shamrock. I went the distance with him, and it was, and again, he was this coming out as a 5 times UFC world champion. He was considered one of the greatest at the time. And when I got the opportunity, I'm like, it just makes sense. I've got to fight the best in the world if I want to be the best. It's like, why
Yeah.
would I, take an easy round? And then after I fought Frank, before he wouldn't talk to me. Afterwards, once the match was over, he kind of settled down. He got back out of the game phase. And he actually said to me, my last fight before that was Jeremy Horn. He goes, if you get the opportunity to fight him in the UFC, don't do it, because he's one of the most skilled and talented guys out there, but one of the least respected. So back in the day, he was called Gumby. If you lost to him, your career was gone. If you beat him, no one really appreciated what you had to go through to beat him. This is a guy that went the distance with Nogueira and Anderson Silva,
Yeah.
had choked out Chuck Liddell, and yet he was still not getting the respect he deserves. So, I had that chat with Frank, and then funnily enough, about 2 months later, I get a call from Joe Silva. Hey, we've lost Cafe Dante. He's got a massive hole in his leg from a staph infection. We need someone to fight Jeremy Horn in the co-main event. And what Frank ran through my head, and I just went, yeah, I'll take it. And then, I did that fight. And, it was awesome. Everyone thought I was going to lose in under 3 minutes by submission. I beat him in 2 minutes and 59 seconds by triangle armbar. So
Yeah.
awesome.
No,
And
I
then
remember that one.
after the fight, I actually sat down with my coach and said, look, we really need to plan my future. We got to stop taking these ridiculous fights. We watched Tito absolutely demolish Evan, and he's like, yeah, no problem. And then same thing, like about a month later, I got a phone call from Joel Silva. Hey, we've got Tito. Nobody wants to fight him. Do you want to fight for a world title? And I'm like, yep, no problems.
Sign me up.
And again, obviously it was career suicide. My record, is a 50-50 record. It looks spotty, but then the amount of world championships, and as I said, it wasn't about building a career. It was about challenging myself and coming out better. And I gained so much from all these experiences. But you don't see guys doing that today,
No, it's
unless they're
definitely
being.
much
You
more. It's
occasionally
much
see
more
it.
calculated risk.
You saw it in some of the newer divisions for a little while there, like women's featherweight, where they were feeding people to try and build champions. But most of the time, anyone with any sort of talent has a manager behind them, controlling their fights and deciding and not pushing them too far too early. Whereas, it was just, for me, it was just jump in the deep end, sink or swim.
Well, you were one of like the fan favorite. Like that's one thing that I know when people look at the record, like you said, a 50-50 record, but they were all top level guys. But you actually have like one of the better reputations of an MMA fighter that just people love. Like, I almost look at it like the Pride situation. Like, in Pride, people were more concerned about your attitude, the warrior spirit, and what you did. I always felt like you were one of those guys that brought that to the UFC, because people always just loved watching you fight. You always were just great to talk to, as with, you know, the commentators, and it was always exciting matches. You never held back. And it was always what I considered like an expression of like a true martial artist. Like, it was, you were there to win, and that was it. There was no like, I'm going to cruise through this round, get some points. Like, that strategy was very apparent, that it was not in, you know, the wheelhouse. It was like, no, I'm not going to, you know, stall just to kind of get to the end of the round. It was always just fight to win. And, you know, and me being a martial artist and a lot of my friends watching, especially at UFC back in those days, like, it was mostly martial artists that were watching and engaged. And I think that's why you got so much respect, and you were always, you know, revered within the UFC, even though that some of the fights didn't go well. It was kind of one of those, you know, died on your sword things, because you represented what being a fighter was about, even if the cards didn't go your way.
Yeah, no, look, I very early had the attitude, my goal is to go out there to win, not to fight, not to lose. And, you know, that was also developed by Jean-Jacques Machado. I saw one of his saying, actually, no, may have been Carlos Machado, one of the Machado brothers. They said, I would rather lose by points knowing my opponent survived than win by points knowing that I was the one that survived. So, you know, my goal was, you know, I'm not going to just try and survive. My goal is to go out there and win. And look, I think the reason I was so popular as well is because I did interact with the fans, because I felt I was a fan. Like, I was as big a fan as the guys coming up to me. So the way they were coming up and getting photos with me, I was doing with the other fighters. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, I can't believe. And I had a couple of times where I was absolutely gobsmacked. Is like, you know, Rashad Evans coming off the Ultimate Fighter came up to me in one of the UFCs, and I'm like, oh, this guy was on the Ultimate Fighter. Wow, he's pretty awesome. And he comes up and goes, man, I've always been a big fan of yours. And I'm like, holy crap. You know, it didn't occur to me. I'm like, I'm fanboying him, and he's coming up to me, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's nice to be appreciated. And, you know, I had a couple of those. Faber did the same thing when he was still in the WEC before he'd come into the UFC. I saw Faber. I'm like, oh, hey, Faber, I'm a big fan. Love your work in the WEC. He goes, oh, Elvis, you know. And I'm like, whoa, you know who I am? Like, it was a shock. I'm like, oh. He goes, yeah, no, I love the way you fight, and you always come out, you give it your all. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And as I said, I was in shock that these people knew who I was, because I still had that fan. Like, I'm a fan. And every time I'm meeting people, I'm going there for the love of the sport and meeting these guys. And then I forget that I'm one of them. I'm one of the fighters. I'm out there doing it. Because when I'm in there, I do it. And when I come out, I'm back to being me again. So, yeah, it was definitely a very interesting time.
Well, I mean, it was very apparent to martial artist fighters that you loved being there. Like, I remember I was always so drawn to you whenever you would fight and everything, because I'm a tall, lanky guy. So obviously I'm like, oh man, he's built like I am, a little bit heavier, but I had the same build. So I would watch and study, and I had a traditional background because, you know, I would see the little Taekwondo flares come out at times, and I'd be like, yeah, oh man, I can identify with this, you know? So I would look at the similar journey. But you could tell that you loved to be there, and it was absolute effort. And I really feel like that's what a lot of fighters and martial artists, you know, keyed off of, because now that you look at it, you're a lifelong martial artist. You know, your career as an MMA fighter in the UFC and Pride, like, that is a part of it. But what you have accomplished of being just a well-rounded instructor and building people up is massively larger than a fight career. You know, a few rounds in the cage, it's fun, it's cool, it's, you know, it's defining, it's important. But when you look at the totality of it, and you're still in a position in life, like, you still have kind of the second half to go. And I think that that's what is exciting, is when you can see the bigger picture behind being a martial artist or a combat athlete, that it's not, you know, get in the cage, try to win a belt and see if you get famous or people remember you. It's the pursuit of excellence that you will never achieve. You know, it's like you're never going to reach your goal as a martial artist. You're only going to continue to try to get better. And, you know, and now that you have the school down in Sydney, I'm sure that when you're training students and you're getting fighters ready, you probably get satisfaction out of that almost more than you did as a competitor. How does that affect you?
No, you're right. It's that you want to you chase perfection, but you'll never achieve perfection. But as long as you keep driving towards it, you're always going to get better. I was actually just saying the other day, it's really good having phenomenal fighters and high-level guys. I've got numerous champions, you know, Australian Jiu-Jitsu champions, MMA champions, I've got boxing champions. But the reality is, most of these guys, regardless what academy they go to, they're going to succeed. They're driven, they have skills, they're athletic. And now I do believe that what I offer them is something, you know, unique, and I have experience as well as the knowledge and understanding. And that definitely has helped them achieve and get to where they are. But I also know deep down that they'd likely get there anyway.
They're going to find success.
It's more the normal person who walks into the academy, he's got to lose a couple of pounds, hasn't got self-confidence, the kid at school that feels bullied. Seeing those lives change really keep me going as well. It's great to have all the competitors, and I still really support and love my competitors. I put time into them, but I don't do it at the expense of every other student. You know, I still try and put in time. I make sure they're getting the best of everything. It's about applying the champion mindset to all my members, not just to my competitors. So you know, I'm very passionate about it. I've always been passionate. I'm very lucky. Obviously, you know, because of my schooling, I'm well-spoken. I've had a very structured education, and I've applied that to my martial arts and the way I teach and do everything. I got the opportunity to fight. I was able to take that passion and knowledge and apply it, you know, working for Fox Sports, doing UFC commentary, so I got to do TV work. I've been a coach, a referee, a judge. I've done it all in the sport, and obviously now I'm running my own academy. I'm able to take that knowledge and experience and pass it on, and it's just been fantastic to see people grow. You know, I've had kids come in who are shy and bullied, and then after a couple of years, they're world champion jiu-jitsu kids, or they're undefeated in jiu-jitsu in Australia, or now they're getting on TV because of the success they're achieving. These are, you know, like 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds getting on TV, winning championships, and it's just it's absolutely fantastic. But then it's also, you know, the person who walks in here who's got, you know, 80 pounds to lose, or 20 pounds, or wants to get in shape for their wedding, but then they achieve that goal, but they see the value behind it and the mental strength. They love the culture, and they keep going past it, and they start developing new goals. And I really do. I know it's an overused term, and, you know, we like to call our students a family, but we really are a family. And it really came through, you know, recently, when, you know, we've only just had lockdown this week lifted, where we can start training. Obviously, we're still under social distancing, and there are rules we've got to, but the look on people's faces, the joy of seeing them back into training, they feel like they've finally back with a family member they haven't had the opportunity to see again. It's very uplifting. And, you know, and again, it's just that, you know, it really makes the struggle for the last 3 months that I've been going through worthwhile, because I know I've kept pushing myself through this difficult time and doing everything I can to keep going, because I'm making a difference. You know, I always say, if I can just change one person's life for the better, then everything's worthwhile. And then when that one person keeps adding up to another and another and another, it's just a very satisfying feeling, seeing you make a difference in the world. And again, I think all of us deep down want to be able to make a difference and be remembered for making a difference. Obviously, I'm very proud of what I've done as a pioneer of the sport. You know, first Australian to fight in the UFC, first Australian to compete at Abu Dhabi, first person to land a heel hook submission, won the first Pan Pacific Championships in Australia, competed in the first ever event in London, first ever event in Manchester, and so many firsts, and they're awesome achievements. But what I really want to be remembered is for the people I've helped. I want the people that I've helped to remember me and what I've done to improve their lives and even, you know, make their lives better, the quality improve, their lives longer. And even if they're here for a short time, not a long time, obviously I prefer the longer you're here, you know, the more we can help and everything. But just, yeah, it makes everything worthwhile, you know.
It's making that impact.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to lie. I run a business. I have to make money. That's why I have to charge fees, and I have to have terms and conditions and direct debits. And but I don't do it to make money. Money just happens to be what I need to survive, so I can keep helping people. And you know, sometimes people may not realize that until they've actually been here for a while. Once they've come in and been part of it, they start to understand, and those people appreciate a lot more what they're getting out of it.
Well, when you start pouring value into people's lives, when you start empowering them, helping them find a true sense of self, achieving something they never believed that they could before, growing into somebody they didn't think they were capable of finding in themselves, they start understanding that there's a bigger purpose here. And the financial reality does exist because, like you said, I mean, there's overhead. I mean, there's economic realities, but people start learning that it's an investment. It's not an expense. It's not money mongering. It is an investment in themselves. And that creates the obligation on both sides. You're as an instructor, you're financially obligated to them to make sure that you pour into them, invest into them, and they are financially obligated to you to make sure that they do their part, be a student, show up. But then they start seeing that you're not investing in them because they're financially obligated to you. You're investing in them because you believe that they're worth it and that they can grow and become something different. You know, it's like when you think about fighters, how challenging is it for a guy that wants to be a professional fighter to go find a coach to show him the way versus somebody that is insecure, self-image problem, you know, is afraid of confrontation, could never see themselves as an athlete, for them to walk into a martial arts gym and to seek help and guidance, to be surrounded by guys that are in shape and tough and punching stuff and choking each other. It's kind of like, that's almost the greater feat. You know, when you're the fighter, it's easy because you're ready to get beat up. You want to go find humility. But when you're, you know, afraid of your own shadow, or you're just insecure or have struggles, that's like the greater challenge to overcome. And when you can help those people transform, it's almost like standard deviations. Their standard deviation of growth is usually probably a little bit higher than a lot of your competitors and athletes. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. And their value as a member is also even more so because they appreciate what they've gained. They're more likely to help others try and achieve those goals as well. You know, look, the reality is fighters don't keep a gym running unless you've got world-class guys who are making, you know, six figures and you're getting a cut of their purses. Fighters cost more money, cost more time than you get back. You know, I don't take money off my fighters. I don't take a cut of the purse. Obviously, if someone makes it big, I would probably appreciate getting
You're
that.
like, hey, if I get a kickback, that's cool. If you make a couple $100 grand.
That's cool. But that's, you know, that's not why I do it. I help them, and you know, they can be hard work. You know, the reality is it's your average member who keeps the gym going, who turns up day in, day out. And funnily enough, they tend to be more consistent than fighters. A lot of fighters, not all of them, obviously, there are exceptions, and thankfully I've got a lot of exceptions, but a lot of fighters will turn up because they've got a fight coming. So they'll train like awesome during fight camp, they'll fight, then they'll disappear. So while the other fighters have got a fight camp going, you know, they're like looking around for their training partners. They're not there. Whereas the people that come in, day out, because they love being here, they want to be part of the culture, the environment. They look forward to catching up with their friends, learning new techniques. They look forward to challenge themselves. They actually give more back to the gym. And then part of I like investing myself in my students when they're willing to invest in themselves.
Absolutely. You know, and that's like the tide that raises all ships, because when you create an environment where your priority is building up those around you instead of building up yourself, there's going to be so much growth that happens. I mean, because even like with some of your fighters, like some of these fighters, they need more mentors in their life than just coach, you know, and when you have a gym that has a group of people raising their standard, trying to improve, even if they're not a fighter, that person might be the right voice for somebody at a stage in their life when they're struggling, you know, or they're just facing some difficult challenges. You know, like you need these different voices in your life sometimes, not always just coach or not always just another fighter. And when you have that diverse group of students and people from different walks of life, and they're all trying to make each other better and help each other improve and support each other, the energy that comes with that, that can transform a life, that's where you're going to see the guy that came in that thought he wanted to be the fighter and realizes, you know what, maybe I do want to be a competitive athlete, but I want to grow as a person as well because of some of those influences that are coming in that we would consider a hobbyist martial artist, you know?
Yeah, no, look, it's one of the things I like to tell my fighters and other people. Competition is an individual pursuit. It's not for everyone. When you're out there alone, you're putting in the work. You need to put in the work to find the success. But success is built on the shoulders of others. Without the people around you, you will not have success. You need great training partners. You need a great training environment. And so the higher you will reach is based on how the people around you support you and build you up. If they are not there to help, if you can't be part of that community, you're not going to succeed because you're going to have a limited growth. The more people, the higher you can be lifted up. So even though you may be doing the hard work on the mat and out there, even, I mean, you may appreciate the coach yelling at you as well, but the reality is you're doing the work. You're out there competing, whether it's MMA or jiu-jitsu, but every single thing you do is a result of the people that you train with. And when you realize that, you put more value into the people around you.
If you were going to help define fulfillment or guide somebody of how to reach fulfillment, what would you tell them?
Look, fulfillment's about being happy within yourself. You're not the goal, as I mentioned earlier, you want to aim for perfection, but you're never going to reach perfection. So understanding that fulfillment is just about getting better, always growing. If you're always growing, you're going to be fulfilled. And this is one of the things I've taken from my fight career and years of martial arts training is I never want to stop growing. And that doesn't necessarily just mean in the gym. It means in my intellectual life, I listen to podcasts, I read studies, I read books. You know, I do stuff for entertainment as well, but I watch information. I'm always learning. It means also putting into my family life, the people around me. I'm always looking at growing a little bit each day. You know, whether it's helping someone, whether it's helping myself, whether it's learning something new, or whether passing on knowledge to someone else. The moment you stop growing, the moment you stop learning, is the moment you stop living.
If you were going to give us some perspective on the difference between motivation and drive, what would you do to explain those two influences people have?
Drive comes from within, motivation comes from outside. So the drive is what pushes you to do what you need to. Motivation is almost like the reason you're kind of doing it, whether it's for family, to lose weight, and even results are more motivation, because when you see results, you're motivated, but you need the drive to achieve those results before you can be motivated. So drive is what gets you going. Motivation is what keeps you going.
So if you were going to try to help somebody who struggles, you know, like they haven't had high levels of success really in much in their life, you know, they have maybe a confidence problem. They feel like the world is kind of against them, and, you know, their internal dialogue is a struggle. what would you tell them to do to start gaining control of themselves?
Now, obviously, I would tell them to believe in themselves the way I believe in them. But that's something that's difficult to grasp for someone in that situation. Obviously, you let them know, but the simplest way is routine, habit. Create good habits, create routine, and then routine will build upon itself. Because as I said, drive builds motivation. Motivation keeps you going. Routine is the process that helps push drive forward. So if you set good habits, create good procedures, processes, and you stick to it, be consistent regardless of results. Stay consistent, the results will come. From results comes motivation. Motivation builds your drive. Drive keeps you going. So it's pretty much just consistency and routine and in the early stages. And if you do that, you will see the results that you're looking for in the long term.
If you were going to give somebody 2 or 3 pieces of advice, you know, like your children, it's like, if all you could give was your children was 2 or 3 pieces of advice to be successful in life, what would it be?
Always believe in yourself, regardless of what anyone else says, because there are going to be people who build you up beyond where you really are. There are going to be people who try and knock you down below where you really are. In the end, it's your own belief that keeps you moving forward. You don't want to rely on the people that are building you up. You don't want to rely on the people that are knocking you down. You want to take it in, but that's not what you want to use. And also something I think is very important to remember is you are a result of the actions you do, not the words you say. It doesn't matter what you tell me or anyone else. All that matters is what you do. And it's important to be aware of what you do because that's defining who you are.
I like that. Man, those are great pieces of advice. I really appreciate you making time to talk to me today. And like I told you, you know, earlier, I've been a fan for, you know, it's probably been 20 years or more. We won't talk about that, but, you know, been a fan
You're
forever.
giving away my age again.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we won't get into that. You've always been an excellent martial artist. You've always brought so much energy to the ring and the cage. And even as a commentator, just your passion for life and helping people is very evident. Is there anything you'd like to finish with today?
Look, as I said, you know, what I do is for the love of it. I'm always available. If people want to chat on social media, and Twitter and Facebook, you know, people are more than welcome to shoot me a message. If you're in Sydney, pop down, check out the academy, jump in and train. You know, I'm open. I have no issues with affiliations and things like that. You want to stay and train, you can. You just want to visit, you're more than welcome to. I always get people from different clubs. Main thing is go out, enjoy life, be happy, and just remember, it's good to be the king.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great day.
You too. Thanks a lot.